Quietly, with a simmering undertone, he called me garbage. In front of the entire staff. "You're just a filthy mechanic." He laughed. "My son has a degree. You'll be gone by Friday." Pauses, then with quiet steel. That was Monday. On Thursday, Ferrari called. Not the dealership Ferrari HQ, and they didn't ask for him. Shocked, Layla Haroun stood beneath the towering glass ceiling of the luxury showroom, her arms aching from 12 relentless hours under the hood of a V12 Ferrari. The engine, a roaring beast hours ago, now purred like silk, flawless, balanced, perfect. She wiped a smear of oil from her cheek with the edge of her sleeve, her hoodie stained and fingers raw, but none of that mattered. That sound, the engines, breath, was her reward. She pulled off her gloves just as footsteps echoed through the marble floor. Mr. Grayson, the owner of the dealership, sauntered toward her with the kind of smugness only money could teach. Beside him walked Colton Grayson, tailored suit, gelled hair, a laminated Ivy League diploma still fresh in the frame. Disbelieving, Colton's eyes scanned her from head to toe like she was roadkill that somehow crawled into his penthouse. "I see the garage rat is still crawling around," he said. His voice was louder than it needed to be. Loud enough for the receptionist to glance up, for the sales team to pause mid-sip of their overpriced espresso. Layla's fingers clenched involuntarily. She opened her mouth, but Grayson beat her to it. He laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a performance, a stage laugh, a laugh meant to cut, a tremor of pain. "You're just a filthy mechanic." "Layla," he said, eyes gleaming. "Colton's got an engineering degree. This is his territory now." The words sank like acid. She looked around. Every eye was on her. Some pitied, some amused. None brave. She wasn't just being demoted. She was being erased. Quiet fury. Then, the sentence that felt like a blade. "You've got until Friday. Clean your station. This isn't your level anymore." Something inside her cracked, but it didn't shatter. Her jaw tightened. Her breath slowed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. But inside her chest, the fire had already started. The silence after his words felt longer than it was. Seconds. Stretched like hours. Someone in the back dropped a wrench. No one laughed. No one moved. Layla slowly peeled off her hoodie, exposing the sleeveless black t-shirt beneath. Her arms, strong and marked with old grease stains, were the record of years she'd put in here, the late nights, the frostbitten winters in the open bay, the engines she'd rebuilt that even the factory reps couldn't figure out, and now she was being thrown out like a burnt-out headlight by a man whose son probably couldn't even read an oil pressure gauge without instructions, colder silence. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She turned and picked up her wrench, not because she had work to finish, but because she refused to give them a show. Grayson smirked and walked off, talking loudly about Colton's internship at Tesla as if it meant he had gasoline in his veins. Layla walked back to her bay. The engine sat there, humming. It was beautiful. Perfect. Just like her work always was. But her heart pounded, not with pride, with rage. With betrayal. Her father had been a mechanic. His father, too. She grew up under the hood, not for money, not for status, but because the machine made sense. It didn't lie. It didn't pretend. People did. That night, as she locked up, she didn't wipe the grease from her face. She stared at her reflection in the side mirror of the Ferrari and whispered, "They'll regret this." And she meant it. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. And when they did, the sound wouldn't be a laugh. It'd be an engine. Roaring. And it'd have her name on it. A heavy sigh. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the fridge, its rattle clashing with the storm inside her. Layla sat on the edge of her futon, arms resting on her knees, eyes fixed on the tiny corkboard nailed to her wall. Her boots were still on. Grease stained her hands, buried deep under her fingernails. She hadn't even bothered to shower. On that board hung a photo of her and her father back when the shop was still his. Back when his hands still worked and his spine hadn't betrayed him. Right beside it was a college acceptance letter. Yellowed. Now, edges curled. She turned down that future. Michigan Tech had wanted her, offered her a spot. But 3 weeks before she was set to move into the dorms, her dad had crashed his motorcycle delivering a customer's rebuilt engine. Spinal cord. Crushed. Hospital bills brutal. Insurance slow. So she'd walked away from that dream before it ever really started. Picked up his tools. Picked up his legacy. She never looked back. Until tonight, voice hardening, she ran her thumb along the edge of the old acceptance letter. The paper was smooth, but her stomach churned, not with regret. With something colder. Sharper. Because she'd never stopped learning. Late nights were for YouTube teardown videos. Sundays were for online courses from MIT. She learned torque mapping while others partied. Studied downforce drag coefficients instead of scrolling through social feeds. She used scrap metal and a salvaged ECU to build her own testing rig in the basement of the shop once. There was no diploma on her wall, but her work. Every machine she brought back from the dead, that was her certification. The Ferrari in Bay 4 didn't care what school she went to. It ran because she understood it. She stood up and walked to the mirror over her sink. Her face looked tired, hair messy. There was a streak of dried oil on her cheek, but her eyes still burning, a flicker of determination. Her dad once told her, back when she was just 13 and helping him rebuild a carburetor, real engineers don't just design, they understand the heartbeat of the machine. He said it while guiding her tiny hands across the timing belt. Design is theory. This, he tapped the engine block. This is soul work. And Lila, she wasn't just an engineer. Cold resolve. She was the heartbeat. Her resolve clicked into place like a well-fit gear. Grayson hadn't fired her because she wasn't good enough. He fired her because she was too good. And she didn't come with a fancy pedigree. He didn't want her brilliance to outshine his son's expensive piece of paper. Fine. Let them think she was just a mechanic. Let them sneer. Because one day soon, she'd designed something they couldn't copy. She built something Colton couldn't even understand. She moved to her desk and flipped open her sketchbook. Pages filled with turbo redesigns, electric engine conversions, hybrid drivetrain layouts. Every page was an idea, a blueprint, a war cry. No investors. No cosigns, no handouts. Just her hands, her fire. She turned to a blank page, drew a circle, labeled it Project Helix. A hybrid engine with F1 level efficiency built for the streets. Her own design, her own specs. She didn't need a degree. She needed time. And revenge. It wasn't slamming doors. It was letting them hear her name whispered at every track, every launch, every top speed run. Layla Haroun, the one they tried to throw away. But you can't throw away steel. You forge it. And tonight, in that tiny studio, apartment filled with rage, oil, and blueprints, Layla began to burn brighter than ever. A gasp of realization. The engine diagnostic screen flickered as Layla ran a second scan on the matte black LaFerrari. It was routine. Customer had complained of intermittent loss in performance. She expected a sensor glitch or maybe a worn ignition coil, but as the screen populated, her eyes narrowed. A precise, repeating misfire pattern identical every time the engine hit a specific RPM range under load. That wasn't mechanical. It was software. She leaned closer, brows furrowed. A flaw in the AQ mapping, likely a bug in the proprietary tuning update. Not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough to ruin peak performance. It was subtle, buried, missed by every other technician who'd probably seen it. But not her. She patched it manually, bypassed the line, adjusted the map, rewrote a tiny loop of code. Nothing fancy, just precise. Just right. She tested it twice. The engine responded like a thoroughbred freed from a muzzle. Clean, perfect. Layla didn't tell anyone. Just logged the fix in her personal archive and moved on. Like always. 2 days later, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Layla Haroun, speaking. This is Domenico Ferrari. I work with Luca Fabri, the gentleman you did the diagnostics for. Layla froze. My team in Maranello saw your patch, he continued, casually, like he was talking about fixing a flat tire. They'd like to talk to you. The call ended. A slow, knowing smile. Layla sat down slowly, phone still in her hand. Her lips curled, not in shock, not in pride. In recognition. So they'd noticed. She looked out her apartment window at the gray Detroit skyline. For years, she'd worked in shadows, silenced in bays, ignored in meetings, outshined by names with louder voices and flashier resumes. But machines didn't care about noise. Machines responded to precision. To feel. To understanding. And she'd been speaking their language fluently for years, calculating. Layla turned to her desk. She pulled out an old flash drive. Inside was her hidden archive, every build she'd ever modified, every tuning software tweak, every bug she'd ever resolved on her own time. Notes, screenshots, hand-drawn diagrams, code rewrites, RPM curves that no one ever credited her for. She opened her tech blog anonymous until now. Hundreds of followers, niche, underground, engineers from across the globe had debated her posts. She'd posted under the alias Torquemuse. It was time to lift the mask. She stayed up all night. She didn't eat. Didn't blink much. Just moved from screen to screen, organizing her years of silent labor into a single sharp-edged blade. By sunrise, it was ready. A digital portfolio that read like a resume from another planet. No degrees, no buzzwords. Just raw, undeniable mastery with a hint of steel. She clicked send. To Aston Martin. To Aston Martin. To KOENIGCGG. To Porsche TORSPOT. To McLaren. Advanced Technologies. And yes, especially to Ferrari. She didn't include a long letter, just her name. Her contact info. And the message. If you're looking for someone who understands machines deeper than specs, I'm already ahead of your team. She stood from her chair, exhausted, but something inside her was different now. Not rage. Not hunger. Clarity. Base single quotes. Tried to bury her behind closed doors and shop grime, but Layla Haroun had outgrown this battlefield. She wasn't looking to prove herself anymore. Now, she was ready to build her empire, calmly assertive. The Zoom meeting blinked to life with the soft click of Layla's mouse. She sat in front of her cracked laptop, wearing a black button-up, hair tied back, not for presentation, but focus. On the other end of the call, 2 Ferrari engineers, a translator, and a recruiter with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. They expected nerves, hesitation, maybe even awe. Instead, they got precision, grace. Layla opened her shared screen and walked them through the patch she'd written. She zoomed into the air cluster on the LaFerrari's control unit, outlined the inefficiency ripple it triggered at peak load, and broke down her correction step by step. Then she paused, looked up, and asked calmly, "Would you like to see what would have happened if the client had gone on a full track day with the original code?" The screen flicked again. Simulated telemetry data scrolled past like a digital heartbeat. She narrated with quiet intensity, each torque curve a stanza, each heat map a rising note in a symphony only she could conduct. One of the engineers leaned forward. The translator hesitated, then said softly in Italian, "She speaks like she can hear the machine. Layla just nodded. She didn't boast, didn't mention her former title. She let the data, the diagrams, the depth of her knowledge speak where resumes failed, unyielding, back at the dealership. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. Colton, fresh with theory. Green, in reality, had already cracked under the weight of his own incompetence. On day 3, he overtorqued a performance. Gasket. Day 5, he entered the wrong calibration into a customer's Bentley and almost locked the AQ. Layla? She fixed it before the client even noticed. Quietly, efficiently, without applause. The sales team knew, the mechanics knew, even Grayson knew, though he pretended not to. He'd see her walk past, clipboard in hand, and flinch for a half second. When their eyes met, because something had changed in her gait. Not arrogance, not defiance, certainty, a controlled breath. She kept her focus, didn't gloat, didn't engage. But inside, her breath had steadied. She didn't feel rushed anymore, because the world beyond this building had already opened its door. And it was beautiful, smug satisfaction. 3 days after the Zoom call, an email landed in her inbox. Short, polite. The subject line read, "Offer from Ferrari P. They didn't mention her lack of a degree. Didn't ask for a second interview. They asked for one thing. Please send your passport. We'd like to fly you to Maranello." Layla sat back in her chair. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across her floor. She didn't cry, didn't cheer. She just smiled, softly, because this wasn't luck. This wasn't charity. This was earned. And though the world had only just begun to speak her name, Layla Haroun had been writing this chapter long before they noticed. Now, they were finally catching up, voice dripping with irony. Thursday morning. Layla walked through the glass-paneled dealership like she owned the place, though she never had and never wanted to. But something in the air had shifted. She wasn't dragging her boots. She wasn't dodging glances. She walked with silence, with certainty. Mr. Grayson was in his office, scrolling through an analytics dashboard he probably didn't understand. Colton sat across from him, legs sprawled like he was still in a dorm. Lounge. They barely looked up until she knocked once and walked in. "I'll be using my PTO for the next 14 days, she said. Grayson barely glanced at her. "Why? Going to be a freelance YouTuber now?" He smirked, proud of himself. Colton chuckled under his breath. Layla tilted her head, then placed a crisp envelope on the desk, a chilling calm. Grayson opened it with one hand, still amused, until the Ferrari letterhead hit him like cold steel. His eyes tracked the words, lowly. Chief Powertrain Innovation Lead Ferrari, S.P.A.MARANELLO. Italy. His smirk disappeared. Colton leaned in, reading over his father's shoulder. Then blinked. Once. Twice. And then sat back like someone had unplugged his ego. Unapologetic. Layla didn't smile. Didn't lean in. Didn't say told you so. She let the silence speak for her. She was still in her black hoodie, sleeves rolled to her forearms, faint lines of grease along her knuckles earned, not scrub it away for show, because this version of her didn't need to be polished. This version was undeniable. A victorious whisper. She turned to leave, paused at the door, looked over her shoulder. Just once. Guess the garage rat knows a few tricks. And with that, she walked out, not just from the office, not just from the dealership, but from the shadow they'd tried to keep her in, into a world where her name would no longer be whispered in doubt, but spoken with respect. A sense of peace. Layla's boots touched down in Italy a week later, the tarmac beneath her firm and real. The air in Maranello carried something she hadn't breathed in years. Freedom. Not just from her old job or from Grayson's smug laughter. Freedom from being underestimated, from shrinking herself to survive, The sun cut across the terracotta roofs as a sleek black car picked her up from the airport. No flash, no drama. Just quiet efficiency Ferrari style. Her new workspace was everything she'd ever dreamed of. Glass panels, whisper quiet tools, robotic arms waiting for human input, whiteboards scribbled with multi-million-dollar ideas. And in the center her desk, custom equipped, already labeled, Layla Haroon, Chief Powertrain Innovation Lead. Ran a hand along the edge of the bench. No grime, no rust. Just potential. Her tools gleamed like polished silver dots, so did her smile. Reflective. Back in Detroit, the world moved on without her, but not really. The absence of her hands in that garage left an echo. Grayson? He sold the dealership within 6 months. Some excuse about downsizing. Colton started a car blog. Something about the philosophy of performance. He posts twice a week. No one reads. Layla didn't check often, but sometimes she caught the updates, not with malice, just detachment. Like watching a distant weather system that no longer affected her skies with quiet strength. At Ferrari, her designs were already being prototyped. A hybrid hypercar with torque response so immediate it felt psychic. Her idea, her math, her soul in every curve and circuit. When the first model roared down the test track, the lead engineer turned to her and said, "I'd never felt a machine respond this intimately." Layla didn't explain. She didn't need to, because every time a car thundered down the track at Monaco or Le Mans, slicing through the air at 300 kilometers an hour, she could hear it, her voice in the engine screamed. It wasn't just performance. It was poetry. And her hands were in every heartbeat of that. Speed. Hopeful. She never called Grayson. Never emailed Colton. Never said I told you so. She didn't have to, because the roar of every engine she birthed into this world. It says it for her now. They called her filthy. Now the world calls her chief engineer. If you've ever been underestimated, don't scream. Build. Then let the world hear you roar. Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe in silent revenge.